Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday lunch break webinar. We're happy to have you join us today. As you know, the topic today is going to be your district policy manual and also the VSBA model policy manual. And we'll be talking about policies in general and how they affect your school district and what their purpose is and how we develop them and all of those good things. I'll introduce you to today's participants. We've got Sandra Cameron, the VSBA Director of Public Policy, Sue Siglowski, the VSBA Executive Director, and usually behind the scenes who came out today and just decided to show her face is Carrie Lamb, the Director of Operations at VSBA. We're also joined today by a guest, a school board member who, oh, Ryan, you decided to show up. Thank you. I meant on camera. We have Ryan Zajac. Did I get that right?
Zajac is perfect, thanks.
Okay, Ryan Zajac is on the Montpelier-Roxbury School Board and is the chair of their policy committee. And so he's here to be our in the field voice and quasi-expert. And he'll be working with Sandra, answering some questions as we go through the process. I realize I never introduced myself. I think you all know me by now, but just in case, I'm Susan Holson, the Director of Education Services at VSBA. I'm going to take a step back and leave it to these three policy wizards and keep learning along with the rest of you. So enjoy the next hour.
So we're going to start with a poll, and I'd like to ask you to please respond by letting us know your role pertaining to policy. So Carrie, would you please put up the poll?
Okay, the poll is up and it looks like about half of you have voted now. %75% of you have voted. Or given us your answers, I guess it should say. Anyone else would like to give us your answer on your position, your current position? Okay, I'm going to close the poll. We're at about 85%. Give you a couple more seconds as a couple more people are just voting now. Okay, we're going to close the poll. And here are the results. Looks like 31% of you are on your SU board and your local board. 38% are on your local board. We have 24% of you are superintendents and 7% are other school administrators.
Fantastic, thank you for that information. This is really useful information to have in our discussion since the process is a bit more complex in a supervisory board, and we will be sure to cover that information a little later in the webinar. First, let's talk about who's responsible for policy. The law is very clear that the school board shall determine the education policies of the school district. Policy development is the first of 32 duties and authorities assigned by law to school boards in 16 VSA Section 563, subsection 1. Under Section 563, a school board may also approve or disapprove rules and regulations proposed by the principal or superintendent for the conduct and management of public schools in the district. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. This brings us to the next question. What is policy? Policy is the most important thing school boards do. Everything is connected to policy, often on subjects that are fairly complicated and where legal constraints are very important. For example, budget and administrator evaluation. Policies are relatively broad statements of what the school board wants to have done in a certain area and how the district wants to evaluate the results, which provides guidance to the administrative team. Board policy describes what should be done, not how it should be done. Procedures designed and carried out by administrators help to describe how things will be done. Policy development should be a priority for school board members. Policies allow the board to articulate school district goals and establish long-term continuity. Policies provide direction to the board and administrators by describing the board's expectations. Policies provide a means for the board to delegate the responsibility for meeting expectations to administrators and for the board to ensure administrators are performing their respective policy and management roles. Finally, policies are an essential component of risk management. They help guide actions when controversy arises, and they ensure compliance with federal and state requirements when failure to comply can expose a district to a liability. Ryan, I'm wondering here if you would share with us the process that your policy committee uses when policy questions arise.
Sure, I think I have an example that'll do a good job explaining this, and the little bit of humility, it's actually an example that shows a little bit of failure on our behalf. About a year and a half ago, there was a fundraiser on one of our campuses. The PTO for that building had organized a fundraiser. Long story short, it didn't go over so well. It was one of those situations where all the board members, all the administrators are getting phone calls and emails and like, how could this have happened? It's a huge mess, and oh my gosh, like things have to change immediately. So as would be expected, in our next upcoming meeting, we're expecting a large audience and we're trying to figure out how to sort through the mess that was on our plate. You know, being a good, largely policy governance board, it's like, well, before the meeting starts, let's all go back and review our fundraising policy and figure out how to address this situation. How did it fit within the policy? Lo and behold, we didn't have a fundraising policy. So the board had a lot of discussion that evening with the community, with administrators, and we raised a lot of really important points regarding fundraising in our district. And it had really felt like, hey, we should have a fundraising policy because of these very important details, but we currently don't. Why don't we? So that situation kind of sent us on a path of, one, charging the policy committee with exploring fundraising within the district while we do or don't have a fundraising policy, and potentially bringing something to the board. Our committee started doing research by reaching out to VSBA, getting all the information on why there's not an existing model policy for fundraising. We engaged with all the local stakeholders, the parents groups, the principals, did interviews, trying to get a sense of where things were to go, and just did a bunch of research trying to figure out the next step. And well, to date, based on Sue's recommendation early in the process, fundraising is a really complicated mess when it comes to policy and law. So we haven't actually made any final decisions there. But to kind of come back to how would policy have informed and how did we as a board handle that situation, that controversy, it was all thinking about the policies that were in the books to help direct the administration. And so I think that is kind of an example that will probably touch on a lot of the things we'll be discussing today throughout the presentation.
That's a perfect example. Thank you so much, Ryan. And procedures outline the process for implementing the policies. Procedures provide details on how things will be done and are developed by the administration. School boards do not go through a formal adoption process with procedures. They should leave development of procedures to the administration. Boards do have the ability to approve or disapprove procedures proposed for the conduct and management of public schools in the district. An example of a procedure that may rise to the level of board review is the prevention of harassment, hazing, and bullying procedure. So we'll pause here and take questions. There is one question I've seen already, and that is, are there policies regarding equity in our schools? And so the first answer I'm going to give is that equity needs to be a consideration in every policy. And it's quite likely that many, if not all, policies may need to be reviewed in light of this concept and with an equity lens. That said, VSBA does have a model district equity policy. It is C29, and it was developed with input from NSBA's, the National School Board Association's equity specialist. So C29 is your reference for this question. Any other questions?
I don't see any more at this time. If you have any questions, please, at any time you have them, you can type them into your question box and we will facilitate them.
Great, thank you. So we'll now look at when policy is needed. On our website is VSBA's Model Policy Manual. A link is provided here on your screen and will be included in the handouts. The manual breaks policy down into 3 types: required policies, recommended policies, and policies to be considered. Please note that we recently updated our Model Policy Manual, highlighting changes at the top of the page and links that allow you to jump around within the website based on the type of policy you're looking for: required, recommended, or to be considered. You can view all 3 types of policies within a specific policy category by clicking on the printer-friendly list of the policies at the top of the page. And I will show you on my screen where that is. So here's our Model Policy Manual. Here is where the printer-friendly lists are. If you click there, you'll see different categories, all of the policies that fall within different categories, such as board operations. And then this new blue box that we added this summer highlights any changes that we've made. And we'll keep any changes, we'll keep notification up for probably about a year, and then we'll take them down. The purpose of the manual is to present model policies for use during the policy development process. As you work with particular policies, you may want to tailor their provisions to your own local situation. We have tried to provide legal references where possible so that you can check the controlling statutes as you develop your own policy language. Required policies are based on a state or federal law or regulation stating that a school district must have a policy governing its activities in a certain area. Examples of required policies are firearms policy, class size policy, and proficiency-based graduation requirements policy. Please note that there are currently 2 policies that have been developed by the Vermont Agency of Education and are provided on our website for reference. These policies should be adopted as written, and they are B8, electronic communications between employees, and C10, prevention of harassment, hazing, and bullying of students. Recommended policies are not required by law, but are instrumental in providing predictability and consistency to board practices or enabling the board to give direction to administrators. Recommended policies should state the board's objective, who is responsible for achieving that objective, and how the board will determine if the objective is met. Examples of recommended policies are professional development and community use of school facilities. The use of temporary policies is new for VSBA, as many things are new during the pandemic. These 2 policies were developed to assist school districts in complying with the safe and healthy health guidance for reopening schools issued jointly by the Agency of Education and the Department of Health, the Agency of Education's COVID-19 guidance for Vermont schools, and the executive orders issued by the Governor of the state of Vermont regarding the state of emergency due to COVID-19. If your district has adopted one of these policies, it will be in effect for the duration of the state of emergency due to COVID-19 and terminates automatically when the state of emergency is lifted. A25 delegates authority to the superintendent to make decisions regarding the reopening and operation of schools, including but not limited to the instructional modes that will be provided during the 2020-2021 school year. D22 holds the school board and all district and school site decision makers accountable for developing a continuum of district-wide flexible modes of instruction and a system of communication during the state of emergency to ensure the provision of the minimal instructional hours. So we can pause here if there are any questions regarding required or recommended policies.
I actually do have a question here. It's how would a board set about reviewing and approving or disapproving administrative procedures?
So is that a question you want to answer?
Yes, I can answer that question. What you would need to do as a board is to have that item on your agenda, and in your packet you would need the either the draft procedures or the existing procedures, and it's not necessarily within the role of the school board to be reviewing all of the procedures, because there are many of the policies require procedures to be developed by the superintendent. But there are a few areas where boards typically do actually approve them. And the one particular one that I'm thinking of right now is the hazing, harassment, and bullying. And that is because those procedures are very technical, and they're very much based on legal requirements.
Thank you, Sue.
Great, I have another question. How long does a board have to adopt a newly required policy?
There typically is not a deadline in the law. I can think of one instance where I think there was a deadline in the law. The electronic communications policy, there was a deadline for that one, but typically the law just says when there's a new law that is enacted that says that a policy is required, it doesn't typically have a deadline in it. So as soon as the board becomes aware that that is needed, they should start the process of adopting that policy.
Right, and I remember when a few years ago, the nutrition policy, and it said in the law what the date was it had to be in by, and the VSBA let everyone know when it was required. I think they had like a year to do it or something, but we did let them know that there was a deadline.
Yes, we would definitely let boards know if there is a deadline.
I have another question. Aren't the procedures for the HHB, which is the hazing, harassment, and bullying, set as part of the policy? So aren't the procedures set as part of the policy?
They are actually two separate documents, the procedures and the policy. However, they're both on our website. One, I believe the procedures are right underneath the policy. Sandra, I think is going, yep, there we are. So we have C10 and then C10P. And as I noted, those procedures are such a high level of importance that they are coordinated with the language of the policy. And that's why the procedures are listed on our website.
Okay, that's all the questions I have right now.
All right, thank you. So what is a good process for developing policy? It's helpful to create a committee of the supervisory union or supervisory district board to do the initial work. The administrative team can research local legal requirements, analyze different approaches, and provide the committee with draft language. The policy committee can then do its work to determine whether the draft language will accomplish the board's goals. Any areas of concern should be reviewed by legal counsel. After all of this is done, the committee presents the draft policy language to the full board for review and possible adoption. There are legal requirements for a board to adopt policy. The requirements are outlined in 16 VSA section 563 subsection 1. Policies must be adopted at a regular or special board meeting after 10 days notice to the public stating the substance of the proposed policy and allowing the public to respond to the proposed policy. Your board should follow these requirements unless it has a policy on policy adoption that outlines a different process. In addition to the notice requirements, policies are required by law to be of general application to the district, in writing, codified, and available to the public. And Ryan, I'm hoping here that you could share with us the strategies that your board uses to engage the community in policy.
Sure, we do the best that we can to reach out and to be informed by larger community values and our student body values. I mean, community engagement is tough. We never feel like we're doing the best that we can be. Sure, most of the board members can probably relate to that. You want to get feedback, but you don't always get it. A couple of things that we do actively do when we're drafting new policy, if like our gender nonconforming student policy is a great example. You know, we worked actively with student groups within our buildings. We had reached out with draft policies to the social workers, some of the guidance counselors, bouncing ideas off and around. We had reached out to some social service groups outside of the school district itself to get feedback on. So we really do kind of hone in on individual stakeholder groups to help us become informed about different topics and to make sure that whatever we're drafting does align with our community. One maybe slightly more subtle general community engagement piece on this topic regarding policy. Our board, I think, does a good job overall of really using communication that emphasizes our policy governance approach. So we really put policy front and center when we're talking about our district and the decisions we're making and how the district is run. I think which helps a lot of people. You know, we have a lot of small towns and small schools, and it comes along the lines of, hey, my teacher did this, and you're a school board member, can you change this for me? And can you do this very detailed thing that's really outside of the purview of us as school board members? So I think in individual communications with other parents, other community members, as well as even during the general board meetings, having that policy focus really front and center kind of helps engage and emphasizes kind of how the board operates, which is good instruction for the general public.
Thank you so much, Ryan. At this time, I welcome any questions on the process for developing policy or the legal requirements for adopting policy.
I don't see any questions here, but I do have one thing that I'd like to say, and maybe ask a question. The VSBA has a coding that we use for our policies. Do all school districts need to use that coding, or can they use their own coding?
It's a great question. The requirement is that it is coded. The requirement is not that the school board necessarily aligns with VSBA's coding. Do you have anything to add to Sue?
I was going to say, so our coding is an example for people for what they can use in.
Right.
And the only thing I would add is that it can be helpful to use the same coding as our model policies, because then when we have a change, it's easier for you to cross-reference, but it's not required.
That's the only question at this point.
Great, thanks. If you serve on a supervisory union or supervisory district board, this slide is for you. Supervisory union and supervisory district boards are required by law to adopt certain policies. An example is the requirement under 16 VSA section 261A, subsection 12, which states that the SU board shall adopt supervisory union-wide truancy policies consistent with the model protocols developed by the Secretary of Education. A link to the model policy on student attendance will be available in the handouts. It's here on your screen. And if anyone has any questions here, Sue is able to help us with this specific topic. Now we'll go on to the next one. Those of you who are board members in a supervisory union or supervisory district probably already understand the value of uniform policies. Each individual board within a supervisory union or supervisory district is responsible under the law for adopting education policies. This means that each district must go through the policy adoption process, even if all districts within a supervisory union or a supervisory district adopt the same policies. That being said, uniformity across all districts in a supervisory union or supervisory district is not always possible. Variability is more likely if there are different types of districts within the same supervisory union or supervisory district, such as operating and non-operating districts. We should strive as much as possible to have uniform policies within a supervisory union or supervisory district. The benefits are efficient use of central office resources, reduced liability, uniform expectations, and the use of best practices. Uniform policies can also help build teamwork and partnerships throughout the supervisory union and supervisory district. Let's look at a couple of case examples. Case study number 1 illustrates how policy can bring consistency across districts. The example is a math coach who divides time in 2 different school districts complains that the principal of school number 1 will not allow cigarette smoking on the employee's break in the employee parking lot, even though the principal at school number 2 allows this practice. On your screen is a link to VSBA's model policy on tobacco prohibition. If both of these districts haven't enforced the same policy, the math coach will not get mixed messages about cigarette smoking in the parking lot. Second case study addresses consistency at school board meetings. The school board chair does not have any guidance on how to handle public comment. Incidents are handled differently based on the topic at hand or the members of the public who are present. A large crowd shows up at a school board meeting expecting to be able to weigh in on a controversial issue throughout the evening. A public participation policy can help the board chair handle the large crowd and all types of public comment by providing reasonable rules of participation. By using the policy, the chair can conduct the meeting in an orderly and timely fashion. Once policies are in place, it's important for boards to review the policies. The VSBA recommends that boards create a cycle for review at the SU or supervisory district level so that all policies are reviewed every 3 years. Boards should pay close attention to policies required by law. Legislative changes or court decisions may require a change to those policies. The VSBA updates its model required policies when this happens and keeps its members informed of these types of changes. If it's been more than 3 years since your district's policies have been reviewed, it's worth the time to conduct an audit of the policies to determine the next steps the board should take. This is a service that VSBA provides. And Ryan, I wonder if you would talk about the process that is used for monitoring policies at the Montpelier-Roxbury Public School District.
Sure, I can walk through what I would say we would ideally like to do. I'd like to probably preface my statements here by saying that this is trickier than it should probably be. All of us being volunteers and competing demands and those controversies popping up here and there kind of can throw a wrench in best laid plans, and keeping up with the monitoring schedule, at least for our district, hasn't been as easy as might be expected. What we have laid out for our policy committee to kind of keep us online regarding monitoring is something along these lines. Our superintendent has a calendar, a schedule that she would follow regarding essentially which board meeting per month a policy would be reviewed and she would monitor. What we would try to do is probably the meeting before, or about a couple weeks before she were to present her review or her monitoring report on any given policy, the policy committee would generally review that policy so that we'd have a chance to see if it still seems like it's up to date, if it feels like it's still fitting, if there have been changes within the district or within state, federal law, et cetera, that might have indicated some needs for change. And so we're all kind of on the same page, the superintendent and the policy committee, in regards to these policies. It's kind of fresh in everybody's minds. There's nothing really specific in which policy when. We'd have the calendar. They were kind of arbitrarily defined across the calendar year. So there wasn't anything special in regards to when we decided to review and monitor those policies, but we tried to do it essentially every year, every policy come up for review. Like I said, it's not quite ideal. One thing that we have done fairly recently, we probably should have started a while ago, that has been very helpful, keeping policies fresh on the entire board's minds and not just the policy committee, and again, the general public as well. Whenever the superintendent presents a monitoring report for any policy, the agenda packet for that meeting, we would include the full policy text also, so that it's right there, it's accessible, it's visible. The policy is a little more alive, you could say, within the district rather than just being relegated at some spot on the district's website. So yes, monitoring is important, and we keep up with the VSBA updates. Like I said, maybe other districts are more successful in this than we have been, but yeah, you have that calendar, but it's not always easy completely staying on track with what you're trying to hold yourself to.
Thanks, Ryan. I really like that strategy of including the policy right within the board packet. Because VSBA's model policies have been vetted by the Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust with legal counsel, we recommend that required policies be adopted as written, or that the board seek legal counsel if it's considering an amendment. If your board is amending an existing policy, it should follow the same procedures for policy adoption, which includes a 10-day warning and public discussion. If your board is replacing a rescinded policy with a new policy, then the warning regarding the new policy should cover the situation. When the motion is made at the board meeting, it could be to adopt a new policy, replacing policy XXX. If your board is rescinding a policy and not replacing it with a new policy, there's no statutory guidance on the procedure. To be safe, VSBA suggests using the same warning procedures used for policy adoption under 16 VSA section 563, subsection 1. And we'll pause here for a poll. So we were wondering, when's the last time your district's policy manual was updated?
Okay, we have about 15% of our participants voting, 50%, 65%, 75%. All right, we'll give you another couple seconds to finish up your voting. We are at 80% currently. And we're going to close the poll.
Thanks, Carrie.
And here are your results. We have 64% say within 1 year was the last time that they updated their manuals. 15% say 2 to 3 years. 6% say more than 3 years, and 15% aren't sure of the answer.
All right, thank you for participating in the poll. This slide shows the process the VSBA's model policies go through before they are posted to our website. Our model policies are drafted by in-house staff and reviewed by attorneys for the Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust for risk management purposes. Additionally, they are reviewed by other entities such as the Agency of Education and the Vermont Association of the School Business Officers, depending on the content. VSBA's model policies are reviewed regularly with priority given to those policies needing an update due to changes in the law or a pandemic. Changes to the model policy manual webpage are highlighted in the blue box I showed earlier at the very top of the page. The VSBA provides assistance to school boards and administrators. Model policies are posted on our website, and we notify board members when a model policy is updated or deleted. In a policy review, the VSBA Director of Public Policy will conduct a diagnostic scan of your district's policy manual in order to locate any weaknesses, explain what is needed to bring it into compliance, and design a recommended course of action for the district's policy committee. Policy development involves working with a policy committee to draft proposed policies and implement a process to ensure that the policy manual is maintained in a timely and effective manner. Examples of VSBA specialized services include districts of an SU creating a single consistent policy manual and centralized services requiring additional policy work at the supervisory union level. My contact information is there on the slide if you ever want to reach out regarding these services? And our last poll. Which policy does your board rely on most frequently? Carrie will post the options for you.
Okay, the poll is up. And you guys have caught the hang of this. We're about 75% now.
We'll play Xbox.
Okay, so I have reached the full capacity. Here we go. And here are the results. 16% say public participation at board meetings. 6% said conflict of interest. 9% said public complaints about personnel. 16% say class size, and 53% say other.
Well, thank you for participating in the poll. And with 53% saying other, I'm wondering now if there are any questions or anything anyone wants to bring forth for further discussion.
Or if they want to put what the other policies are that they are looking at.
Yes.
Right now, we have no other comments
Okay.
or questions.
At this time, we'd like to give you the opportunity to provide us with some feedback. We're wondering if you think there's anything missing from our model policy manual, and if so, if you would please use the question box on your screen to input that information, which we will collect and respond to.
Now,
we
for
think-
those that are watching the recording, Sandra, what would we suggest for them to email that to us?
That'd be great. They can email me, yes. And this slide has my email address here, scameron@vtvsba.org. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. If there are no others, it looks like I don't see any other new questions. We thank you very much for attending the VSBA policy webinar. We hope we've provided you with useful information that you can bring back to your board. If you have any additional questions, I'm always happy to answer them. And this concludes our Policy 101 webinar.